And so at this time, I'm going to introduce my main speaker, only speaker. So Miss Diane Keene and her husband Junior's here. Because Junior's going to sing for us in a little while too. That's a surprise. So that was part of the deal. Junior had to sing. So, but anyway, Diane, at this time, I would ask that you come and give our Memorial Day service. Thank you.
I'm going to try without the microphone. If you can't hear me, let me know. Microphones are foreign to me. So we have a rare day today when it's comfortable to be at Brick Church. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not too windy. When I was asked to be the speaker for today's service, my first thought was that was quite a compliment to even be considered. My second thought was how nervous I would be. But I knew if I declined, Wayne would make me find another speaker. So, here I am.
Diane, can't hear you.
Can't hear you?
Yeah.
How's this?
Cool.
Hello? Okay. Not only is it an honor to be asked to speak today, but it's also an honor to serve as secretary for the Old Brick Church Cemetery Association. The other members of the board are folks I've known since my childhood. Brick Church, as well as the Bacon's Castle community, are very special to all of us. To begin, I wanted to share one of my earliest memories of Brick Church, and many of you can relate to this memory. When I started school, and for many years after that, Annie Rose Price was my bus driver. Of course, being a member of the Bacon's Castle community, Annie Rose always knew when a funeral was scheduled to take place here at Brick Church. And on those afternoons, before the bus ever left the schoolyard, she would make an announcement that we needed to be quiet as we drove by the cemetery. So as we rounded the curve at Jesse Warren's, a collective was heard throughout the bus, and no one made another sound until we got to Sarah and Lee Honeycutt's store. Am I not holding it? So even the most mischievous boys on the bus didn't push Annie Rose, and she taught us respect from a young age. As I did some research for today, I learned a few things about the Memorial Day holiday that I didn't know. Most of us know that Memorial Day was originally called Decoration Day. Its beginning was in 1868, and it was founded by General John Logan, who was Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Army of the Republic. I never heard of that, but it was a fraternal organization made up of Union veterans. At the beginning, the holiday was set aside to honor the fallen soldiers of the Civil War by decorating their graves. It wasn't until 50 years later that the holiday would come to include honoring soldiers lost in all wars, but it was still an unofficial holiday. In 1971, the observance of Memorial Day was changed from May 30th to the last Monday in May. That was mostly for the convenience of a 3-day weekend. It was then that it became an official holiday. Many groups, including the Veterans of Foreign Wars, have advocated that the date be changed back to May 30th. Their feeling is that making it part of the 3-day weekend and the unofficial start of summer causes the public to lose focus of the real meaning of the holiday, which was meant as a summer occasion. I wasn't aware of this, but in 2000, Congress passed the National Moment of Remembrance Act, requiring the public to stop for a moment at 3 p.m. on Memorial Day to remember those in the military who lost their lives while serving the country. I don't come from a military family. Through the years, a few family members have served in the military, and thankfully, to my knowledge, they all returned safely home. So today I'd like to share with you the stories of 2 young soldiers, members of the greatest generation, who would become very special to me later in their lives. Many of you knew my uncle, Benny Ellis. Benny was one of my mom's 6 brothers. The family lived in the Castle House from the early 1920s until the early 1940s, and many of them remained in this area the rest of their lives. In November of 1941, at the age of 20, Benny joined up to serve in World War II. I'd always thought he was drafted, but in reading some family notes recently, the term joined up was used. So Benny was working in the shipyard at the time, but Newport News was probably as far as he'd ever traveled from his hometown of Bacon's Castle. So here he was going overseas to fight in a world war. I can't imagine the fear he must have had. He spent his 21st birthday in France, and then in November of 1944, the family received word that Benny was missing in action. They would later learn that he had been taken prisoner of war, and I'm sure that brought on an even higher level of fear for him. Benny was able to escape that prison camp a few weeks later, and he remained in Germany until he was honorably discharged in March of 1946. He then safely returned home to the States. A few years later, he married Doris. They had 2 children and were married 54 years until his death. The other soldier I wanted to mention today is my late father-in-law, Pete Keene. Pete was born in Chatham, Virginia, but came to Newport News as a young man in search of work. He was drafted for service in World War II, and when he was sent to boot camp in Texas in 1944, his 18-year-old wife, Grace, was expecting their first child. Once he completed boot camp and before going overseas, Pete managed a quick trip home to say goodbye to his wife. And when he arrived home there in Newport News, he found out she was in the hospital. She had given birth the day before to their son, who's now my husband, J.R. Imagine the fear that Pete felt as he boarded the Queen Mary a few days later. It was being used as a troop ship and sailed off to war. He had to wonder how his wife and baby son would make out with him gone. And he knew there was a strong possibility he wouldn't return home to them. But he did, and it was 75 years ago yesterday that he came home. And his son was nearly 18 months old. Pete and Grace added 3 daughters to their family, and they were married an amazing 71 years before his death at age 91. From the military records in their 2 families, I know that Uncle Benny and Pete were both in France and Germany. They both served in the 3rd Army under General Patton. Uncle Benny was discharged just a few weeks before Pete, so I couldn't help but wonder if their paths may have crossed. For all of Facebook's faults, there are many encouraging and thought-provoking posts to be found there. One I recall from last year as high school graduations were drawing near. It said, many people are disappointed that graduating classes won't get to have a senior trip this year because of COVID. But remember, in the 1960s, many young men took their senior trip to Vietnam. And another anonymous quote that seems especially appropriate for Memorial Day. Our flag does not fly because the wind moves. It flies with the last breath of each soldier who died protecting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. And also, probably should have started this from the beginning, is for all the people that were here that has served in the military, families in the military, on behalf of myself and the cemetery committee here, I'd like to thank you for your service. You know, Junior was just a baby, but his parents, you know, they endured a lot. So therefore, Junior endured a lot, you know, and so, you know, I'd like to thank you and your family for their services. So just to remember, you know, of all the people that have served throughout all the wars, you know, they're why we're here today, that we can do this. So I'd like to thank you for that.